Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
What is up? A misflips of the mouse to get started here, but we are live today. I had said a couple of days ago that all my reaction shows this year will be live. Road games will be immediately upon the end of the game, at least as quickly as I can after getting my notes together. Home games, since I go to the stadium, there will obviously be a delay coming home and getting the studio set up and getting some notes together as well. I had mentioned that yesterday's reaction show likely wouldn't be live because I wasn't able to watch the game live. But thought I would go live today, a day after, with my reaction, because I wanted to hear from you and get your reaction to the game. Because as the title indicates and the thumbnail indicates, pretty hard for me anyway. And those of you who have watched the show for any length of time know that I tend to lean towards the side of optimism, right? But I try to be as brutally honest as I can be and point out things that I see that I don't like. It's hard to do. It's hard to do coming out of that game. I mean, first of all, let's put into context what the preseason is, right? Especially now. I mean, it used to mean a lot more to the viewer. It used to be a lot more fun to watch. You could count on, way back in the days when there were 4 preseason games, which was just 3 years ago. Even in the first week, most teams would play their starters for a series. In the second week, they might play the first quarter. And then week 3 was when they would play their starters the most, because teams started to figure out that, let's use that 4th preseason game to evaluate the back end of the roster and put our starters in bubble wrap and not risk any injury. That's all changed. And many teams don't play any significant starters in the preseason at all, or very little. We see big name quarterbacks not play at all. Mike Macdonald did say this week that he was going to play a lot of his starters today or yesterday, particularly on defense. But he even made it sound like all the guys who weren't injured would play on offense. That was not the case. There were a bunch of key starters on offense that were not in uniform. Charles Cross at left tackle, Ken Walker, George Fant, of course, Geno Smith. We knew he wasn't going to play coming off the injury 2 weeks ago. They were going to be careful with him. But on defense, he kept his word. And the only starters that we did not see out there were Draymond Jones and Jerome Baker, nursing injuries. A couple other guys we didn't see, Mike Jackson, who's battling for a spot in the secondary. So that was cool, because this was Mike Macdonald's NFL head coaching debut, preseason as it may be. And so after 8 long months since Macdonald was hired on January 31st, we have been parsing his words, trying to connect dots, trying to put together what he and Ryan Grubb say about what this team's going to look like versus what their teams have looked like in the past. Trying to glean as much as we can from practice, even though no video was allowed this year. All of those things, and not being able to see them in a game environment until last night. And a couple of points right off the top, and then I'm going to give you my 5 sort of standouts from the game. And it was tough to whittle that list down to 5. And then 1 or 2 question marks that I do have coming out of the contest. But I'll just say this right off the top. My main takeaway, my primary takeaway out of this game, this team was prepared. This team was well coached, disciplined. It seemed like for the first time out, new players and a new scheme, they knew their assignments. Very few penalties, false starts, things like that. And look, I think we need to be really careful. And when I say we, I mean me. The first couple of months of the season to to try to resist the temptation to compare everything that this current coaching staff is doing and how it looks versus the old coaching staff. There will be a point at which we just need to move on from that. But for now, like, this was our first opportunity to see what this team would look like after 15 years of knowing what it was going to look like with the way Pete Carroll managed this squad. And one thing that stood out right away is it felt like they took this preseason game more seriously than in the past. And maybe serious isn't the right word. Obviously, they took the game seriously. But this team, I thought, came out with more intensity than we've seen in the last, well, in just preseasons in recent memory. And again, I thought the execution, the physicality, both sides of the ball, the hitting, even the play calling and kind of how they administered some things throughout the game. If that's what you were hoping to see, and at the end of last season, and we've talked ad nauseum about this, that really that Pittsburgh Steelers game to me was kind of the final nail in the coffin for Carroll and his staff. That was the first game that I can recall where it seemed like want to was an issue, effort was an issue, in addition to execution. Just guys were missing assignments all over the place on both sides of the ball. That wasn't in question last night. Nobody seemed to show up last night and treat this as just a preseason game. So from that standpoint, it's obviously what we were hoping to see, but it also, I think, gives us a better basis to evaluate now individual players, because it feels like everyone showed up ready to go. And so let's get into some standouts. And this is live. If you're watching on Twitter, if you're watching on the YouTube channel, you can comment, ask questions, but mostly I want to hear what you guys thought about players who stood out, because as I said, I could probably name just about everybody on the roster. Almost every player who suited up and played in that game last night had moments, which was fun to see. And I will say that leads me to one more general observation before I get into some standouts. I think one thing that we felt kind of got lost from, let's say, 2015 up until, the last couple of years is, from 2012 to about 15 or 16, the Seahawks roster was so much deeper than everyone else in the league that you would see it in preseason. We would bludgeon teams in the third and fourth quarter, and usually end up winning 3 or 4 of our preseason games because we had better talent on the field in the second half. That wasn't so much the case in more recent years. Kind of felt like that again last night. Guys flying around in the fourth quarter, hitting, making plays, trying to make the roster. There's going to be some really good players cut on the cut to 53. And by the way, later this week, I will be doing my next, haven't done a 53-man roster projection since right before training camp started. Now that we've seen them in game action, we'll be doing that later in the week. So stay tuned for that. All right, let's get to my first standout of the game. Not a player. It's a concept. It's a group. The defense, right? As we said, just Draymond Jones, Jerome Baker, the only starters not out there. Rotated a bunch of guys, playing for Draymond Jones, basically. Boye Mafe got some more run. And Byron Murphy got a little over 30% of the snaps in there as well. And then the rookie 4th-round draft pick Tyrese Knight started for Baker in his place at weak side linebacker. And even Jerome Dodson only played 11% of the snaps, so he wasn't out there very much, but he did get a really good hit in. That was fun to see. But first 2 series of the game, all those guys, those starters other than those 2 were in there. And the results were undeniable. 2 3-and-outs. As a whole, the team only gave up 198 yards to the Chargers. And 9 first downs in the entire game. 5 3-and-outs, including those first 2 drives. Reek Woolen really stood out. He was kind of picked on in coverage by Easton Stick and the Chargers, and had 3, by my count, passes defense. Don't know how many got officially, but he looked fantastic. Defensive line got push. Gap integrity seemed to be good. Everybody was in the right place. There weren't any big holes in the running game for the Chargers to exploit. They seemed quick to react in coverage. They seemed connected, to use that word that Leslie Frazier has talked about, in the secondary, where guys seemed to be. There were a couple of plays where the camera angle would pan back wide as Stick was releasing the ball, and it seemed like all the guys in the secondary were moving in unison. We didn't see those steps of hesitation, guys kind of frozen, trying to decide where to go. It was good to see Kayvon Wallace and Kobe Bryant team up for that interception. And Bryant almost had a second one that was also tipped, I think. But Wallace with the big hit on the tight end, ball goes right to Kobe Bryant, now a full-time safety, showing off some of the depth there. Really, the safeties all across the board had their moments. Even Ty Okada in the fourth quarter laid the lumber on a receiver on the right sideline. And this wasn't a complete B team we were facing with the Chargers. Keep a couple things in mind. First of all, their starting quarterback, Easton Stick, very experienced. Started 5 games last year in place of Justin Herbert when he went down with an injury, completed 64% of his passes, had a 3-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, an 86 passer rating, and ran for 144 yards. He's really mobile. He's been in the league 4 or 5 years now. He's started regular season games and played well. And, they had Joe Alt out there. They had some of their young starters out there. And this was not just Mike Macdonald's debut, but this was Jim Harbaugh's debut as head coach of the Chargers in his return to the NFL. And so for all the reasons we're looking at this game to tell us what the identity of this new Seahawks team might look like, well, they're doing the same thing. So they didn't not take this game seriously. And they were trying to do the exact same thing. Jim Harbaugh teams are known for running the football, being physical, hitting you, letting you know that they're there. So 2 very similar philosophies going head to head here. And we're the road team. And it was clear from the first series that Seattle was the more physical team and the more prepared team. Just really, really, really impressed with a bunch of guys up and down the line. Even in the second half when we were getting down into the second and third team, guys like John Radigan, right? Just continues every time he gets an opportunity. He just continues to look like an NFL player, a guy that, if Dodson and Baker were both hurt and you had to play John Radigan, maybe that inside linebacker spot isn't in as bad a shape as some of us feared it would be. Tyrese Knight looked like he knew where he was supposed to be. He was flying around the field. Radigan had a sack. His drops seemed good. He seems athletic enough. Nehemiah Pritchett, saw a lot of him flying around. Just a really, again, I could point everybody out. Derek Hall played 60% of the snaps, had a sack. Mike Morris, it didn't fill up the stat sheet, but was another guy again. I think he played more than 50% of the snaps also, where he just looks like he's going to be disruptive. We saw those flashes from Byron Murphy too, right? We saw the massive run stuff where he beat a double team, got a tackle for loss in the backfield. Now, he didn't have the greatest PFF grade today because of his tackling. I think it was 25%. He only had like 3 or 4 opportunities, but a large portion of that grade was missed because he had a sack. He had Easton Stick right in his arms and let him bounce off of him. So I'm sure he'll get some of that. Mike Macdonald did say in his post-game press conference, like we've got some notes. He was really pleased. He was really complimentary of what he saw, but he said, we've got some notes that we're going to follow up on. And I'm sure one of the notes is Byron Murphy wrap up sacks. But yeah, the defense was an obvious one because even in the preseason the last few years, not the case. We got used to watching other teams' backup quarterbacks drive up and down the field against our defense. Second thing that stood out to me, I could have just said the running game. It seemed really intent, really balanced run-pass mix yesterday. But I thought all the backs performed well, in particular the 2 that are vying for that. And I think it's a little lazy to call it the third down running back position because when Zach Charbonnet is presumably your backup running back, he's going to be out there a lot on third down. Ken Walker, Ryan Grubb has said they want to use more in the passing game. He's going to be out there on third down. So it's not necessarily your third down running back that's going to have that role full time, but it's your third running back. And the story throughout camp has kind of been, where's Kenny McIntosh? He had the dynamic preseason or training camp last year until the mock game, got hurt, and then we didn't see him the rest of the year. And then there were some signs this training camp that maybe he wasn't standing out the way that we're used to seeing or that we saw last year, that maybe in the public scrimmage at Lumen Field last week, that Holani looked better. Corbin Smith was on the show last week singing the praises of George Holani. I thought McIntosh showed up last night, and so did Holani. And the fact that both of them appear to be viable NFL running backs is a good thing, because I think there's a really strong chance now that, Nick Bellore isn't on the roster anymore. They don't carry a fullback, and you could make the argument sometimes they carried Bellore. They used a linebacker spot to carry him. I think they're going to keep 4 running backs. And, spoiler alert, my 53-man roster projection, I've got McIntosh and Holani making it. McIntosh 8 out of 40, or 8 rushes, 40 yards, of 5 yards per carry, had a long of 14. You saw the vision, the cutback ability, the decisiveness, cutting the ball up. And then Holani averaged 4 yards per carry, 6 carries for 24 yards. And then he had the 11-yard touchdown where he bounced it outside. He's a bigger guy. He's physical, but you saw the dynamic ability there to be able to cut outside. Maybe, watching Ken Walker in practice every day is rubbing off on him a little bit. And even Kobe Lewis, although his YPC wasn't that great, he actually led the team in carries. He had 10 for 33 yards. Showed a little shake on his part. Seahawks usually like to carry a running back on the practice squad. Really, really impressive. And even though there were some uneven performances from some of the interior offensive linemen, from what I saw, they stuck with the running game, and they were able to move it. They had a long drive in the third quarter. I think it was a 14-play, 84-yard drive that, they weren't able to stick it inside the 2. They got stuffed inside on 2 running plays. But I thought for the most part, they were able to use the running game effectively to balance out the passing game. And speaking of the passing game, I thought Sam Howell looked really good. I think there's been a lot of concern throughout the offseason and training camp that, some people have gone as far as to say that maybe they made a mistake in giving up some draft capital to get Sam Howell, that maybe this offense doesn't fit, or that what we saw at times in Washington last year and his sophomore year at North Carolina, when he was being talked about a potential first-round pick, that maybe we missed on that he was erratic in his accuracy, and that the gap between he and Geno was so wide. Even some question that had someone on the show recently tell me it was G. Scott. If you remember the episode with G. Scott, where he said if Geno went down in a game, they would go to Sam. He's the clear number 2. But if he was going to be out for an extended time, he thought maybe he would go with PJ Walker, that he might give him a little bit better chance to win. And then we started to hear that Howell was much better this last week in practice. And actually that he was better the week before when Geno was out. But then some of that kind of came back down to earth because the first team offense just didn't move the ball very effectively in the public scrimmage at Lumen Field. I thought he looked like a starting NFL quarterback. 16 out of 27, 130 yards, a touchdown, got sacked twice, but he was able to move around a little bit too. 4 rushes, 17 yards. And one of the sacks, he had no chance. It was just a breakdown in protection. But even given that, and even given some of the inconsistencies up front with some of the young offensive linemen, I thought he trusted his pocket. The touchdown pass to Brady Russell, he stood right in there. And most of all, I saw a guy who was decisive and quick with his throws, and you see the arm talent. Like, we have for years in this city been damaged a little bit in our opinion of certain quarterbacks' ability to throw screen passes and throw the ball in the flat. Screen passes, just from a schematic standpoint, have been an issue in Seattle for a long time, going back over a couple of offensive coordinators. However, it just wasn't a strength of Russell Wilson. Like, that wasn't a throw that he was always comfortable with. And sometimes it just wasn't accurate enough to give the back a chance to make the play. Howell had to do that a few times last night and seemed really confident in that throw. Had a couple of throws down the seam that were outstanding. But the biggest thing that stood out is how quick he made his decisions. And when he decides to get rid of the ball, it's gone. You can't deny the arm talent. And I thought he looked like a guy absolutely capable of running this offense if Geno Smith should be down. And so I think it was good that he got that opportunity. I suspect that next week Geno will play a series or two, but that then Sam Howell will get the bulk of snaps. He's going to get more opportunities to run this team when the bullets are live, and make sure he's prepared, and so they can see what they have too. I thought hopefully last night's performance was such that people that were worried about Sam Howell are a little less worried now, because I thought he was outstanding. The next one, the recipient of his touchdown pass, Brady Russell. Been talking about him for a few weeks now. Corbin Smith talked about him. The real eye-opener for me was sitting with Bryce Coots at the public scrimmage at Lumen Field a week ago and seeing that Brady Russell's getting first-team reps in this thing. Brady Russell's on every special team. And then Corbin Smith said Brady Russell was getting first-team reps. You know, the tight end depth chart, top of it, we know. Noah Fant, 2-year deal, good money. He's going to be an integral part of this offense. Pharaoh Brown signed mostly for his blocking ability, but also a guy that can contribute in the pass game, but just a 1-year deal. His spot is secure. And then Tyler Mabry, sort of the perennial practice squad guy, coming back again. And then they draft A.J. Barner in the 5th round. But Barner has not really stood out in camp. And in fact, he was the 4th. Well, last night he would have been the 3rd tight end to see the field, because no Noah Fant. Pharaoh Brown started. Brady Russell was getting first team run. And then it was Barner later on. And some Tyler Mabry as well. 3 catches, 25 yards, and the touchdown. And he just looks like a guy that belongs. He also went out for the kickoff as one of the captains. I think Brady Russell's got this team made. You know, and just another example of, I mentioned on the show with Corbin the other day that this current coaching staff should send some thank you cards to the last coaching staff, because one of the things, and also upstairs to their GM, because one of the things that John Schneider did so well is comb, especially at the cut to 53 or right after, comb other teams' practice squads and find opportunities to poach guys. Because if you sign a guy off another team's practice squad, you can, as long as you give them a 53-man roster spot, the other team can't block it unless they elevate him to their 53-man. They got Raekwon O'Neal that way, a guy who's still on the roster vying for an offensive lineman spot. They got McClendon Curtis, who has been a key name all throughout the offseason and training camp. Going to talk about him in a minute, that way at the cut to 53. And they got Brady Russell shortly after that, late in September, early in the season, poaching him off the Eagles practice squad. And this is a very nondescript player. He was a walk-on at the University of Colorado, battled some injuries there, was known for his ability in the passing game, but never put up big numbers. His career numbers at Colorado, 78 catches, 799 yards, 3 touchdowns. Doesn't blow you away athletically. If you look at his RAS, his relative athletic score, it's all yellow, which is good. There's no green, which is outstanding. There is some red because he's a little undersized, 6'3", 250. Kind of reminds me of, off the top of my head, like the Jacob Hollister type, right? But obviously the staff likes him and sees something in him, in how much run he's getting with the first team and also going out for the coin toss. Brady Russell, I think, has this team made and might be one of them. you could maybe call him the Jake Bobo of this year's camp, where a guy came in with under the radar, seemingly longer odds, and I think he's got a roster spot wrapped up. And we're only a week into the preseason. And then another one. So before I get to this one, I spent a lot of time watching the offensive line. I went back and looked at the condensed replay last night and probably spent almost as much time rewinding to watch certain plays to focus on offensive line, because I wanted to make sure that I was seeing things on each play. Probably as much time doing that as the actual condensed replay takes if you just play it start to finish nonstop. And there's some things that were tough to judge. I mean, we saw Stone Forsythe again at left tackle. He's been, the presumed backup at left tackle for the last few years. He's also capable of playing right tackle. Did a little bit last year when they had injury issues. We'll find out in the next couple of weeks if he's got a chance to make this team again. But he's a guy that we just kind of know who he is, right? And so I didn't spend a lot of time watching him. The centers, I watched as closely as I could, and then the interior offensive lineman and the right tackle. George Fant not playing last night, of course, because they're just protecting him, and we still don't know Abe Lucas's status. So the starters yesterday were Forsythe at left tackle. Laken Tomlinson, I think, played a couple of snaps at left guard and then gave way to Christian Haynes. And then we saw some Raekwon O'Neal at left guard as well. And then later in the game, Sataoa Lamea. And then at center, Nick Harris started. That's been a common theme because he and Sam Howell have worked most closely together. So even though Oluwatimi seems to have the edge over Harris on the depth chart right now, Harris usually goes with Howell, at least to begin. They did it at Lumen Field in the scrimmage that way. And then you're starting right guard. Last night was Anthony Bradford, who seems to have held that position, as Corbin Smith was saying, all throughout camp since he came back from injury, relegating third-round draft pick Christian Haynes to the second team. We all assumed he would just be the presumed starter. And then right tackle was McClendon Curtis. That leads me in a very long-winded way to my number 5 standout. I thought Anthony Bradford was outstanding. And this was maybe one of the most surprising things I saw in the game. Because he's a guy that I thought might not fit this current scheme. And that's why Haynes would eventually beat him out, because known as a mauler in the run game, has struggled in pass protection and just isn't the smoothest athletic mover that we've ever seen. But, and I've even, I hesitate to say this, but I will. I've heard other people question his work ethic, but he sure looks like he's been putting the work in. I thought he was the best interior offensive lineman on the field last night. I thought he looked like he was quicker out of his stance, that he did get to second blocker or second level in an adequate amount of time, but that mostly the things that we love about Anthony Bradford showed up last night. That dude is strong. There are multiple reps on tape from that game where he's just taking out a defensive lineman with one arm, taking care of him, and then able to look at where he goes next. I thought he was incredibly stout in that way. And then when he realizes he doesn't have a second guy to worry about, and he turns back and gives you his second burst of attention, then he just buries you. I thought it was really, really encouraging, because you start to check boxes now, right? As long as we've been hoping that offensive line would come together with some sort of group that might have some continuity, and we could look forward to 2, 3, 4 years of having the same core. At least 4 of the 5. There's always going to be some turnover, right? But we're starting to check boxes. Charles Cross raves about his performance in training camp so far this year. Albert Breer said he appears to be playing at an all-pro level, that he looks like an all-pro on the field. Left guard, you can check for now with Laken Tomlinson. Seems like he looks like the solid veteran pro that they were hoping he would be. but also there's some young guys behind him. We'll talk about that in a second. Center, Connor Williams. If he's healthy, that box is checked. It's a 1-year deal, but you hope that he's able to sign long-term, that he likes it here. That's an all-pro level center in the prime of his career. That box is checked. If you can check left guard with Anthony Bradford for at least the remainder of his rookie contract, that's huge. And then we'll figure out right tackle. Should be in good shape as long as George Fant's healthy. And then we'll see about Abe Lucas, and that could be something that we're looking that's a big topic of discussion next offseason. I can hear the questions already to what I just said. And I've actually had people say this to me. I had a comment on one of the shows a couple weeks ago that if Anthony Bradford starts at right guard, that they failed at the number 81 choice in the draft, that Christian Haynes was a failed pick. It's ridiculous. Christian Haynes played a lot of left guard yesterday as well. After Laken Tomlinson left the game, he moved over to left guard, something he never did at Connecticut, but he did play some center at the Senior Bowl. And I thought he had some good reps. I could have easily talked about him as a standout here. I thought he looked good. You could see he's a starter. He's an NFL starter. He's going to be a long-term answer to this, the pieces of this puzzle. So just that he has that versatility to jump over to the left side, it's a good thing. And it also means that if this happens, that you hit on your 4th round pick last year. And so, there's only so many spots to go around. I think they drafted Haynes, potentially with an eye on moving him around. Some people think he could be an outstanding center. But B, also to challenge Bradford because they weren't sure. Well, if a guy jumps up and takes that spot, that's never a bad thing. And I think if that happens, if Anthony Bradford goes out and starts 17 games this year and establishes himself as an excellent starting right guard, well, then Christian Haynes gets moved to the left side permanently, and that's your duo moving forward. So I dismiss that argument. Now, my one concern, and we only have to move over about a foot. Despite lots of talk about how good he has looked at camp, and again, I keep name dropping Corbin, but if you haven't checked out that episode yet, go back. And just tons and tons of great information from his observations at camp so far covering the Seahawks. I asked him about McClendon Curtis, because in particular, when he had to play right tackle full-time in the scrimmage at Lumen Field because they didn't want to play Fant there, thought he struggled. And in one particular drive, it was a 3-and-out against the defense, and it was McClendon Curtis getting beat off the edge 3 times. To which Corbin said he thinks he's been the best offensive lineman in camp at times, and that he's made this roster because he can play guard and tackle. Now, maybe he's better inside at this, but what I saw last night was terrible footwork. I'm no offensive line expert, but I've been watching football for 4 decades. And you can tell when someone has good tackle footwork and when they don't. And then you can tell if someone has good tackle footwork, but they just don't have the athletic ability, the lateral quickness to be able to get out and match up against speed rushers. Curtis's footwork, to me, is terrible. He doesn't have a slide step. He gives up on it too soon. He might take his first kick slide step, and then he retreats into a back pedal. And this gave me PTSD because it was very Jermaine Ifedi of him. That was one of the things. I mean, we can talk about Ifedi's hand usage too. That seemed to be okay from Curtis. He's got those long arms, and his hand usage seems fine. Maybe it's a confidence thing, or maybe it's just he hasn't. He played right tackle in college, but it was a small school in Chattanooga. And on the interior, that type of slide step footwork isn't as crucial. You can get away with some things with his length and his strength and pass protection on the inside. But when you're out on an edge, man, that's tough. And go back and look. There's rep after rep after rep where his first initial step might look okay, and then he gets into a back pedal. And you're off balance. You cannot hold your base if someone comes at you with a bull rush. You just can't. And It needs a lot of cleaning up. And that was one thing that stood out. I've got some other notes too, but let's see what we got. Hello to everybody on YouTube. I see you. Can't put these comments up on the screen, but let's see what we got here. And you know what? It's a live show. Screw it. I'm putting on my glasses. All right. Shout out to McVirus, to Steph, to me. Shout out to me. Love that username. Really encouraged by what I saw. McVirus, so glad football's back. I mean, that was the biggest takeaway, right? We got to see real football, even in a preseason environment. Mike says, saw some good play all around. Our complexion this offseason is way ahead of last year. I think that's a good point. He used the word complexion, and I don't know if I used this term early in the show, but detail-oriented just seems to be one of the themes that we're hearing about how these practices are run. It's what I saw at the practice at Lumen. Very, very detail-oriented. And the teaching. When you listen to Mike Macdonald talk, you listen to his assistant coaches talk, you listen to Ryan Grubb talk, the attention to detail and the way they teach it. And I've read extensive, stories about Macdonald's teaching methods. And he has a way of communicating and breaking concepts down into simple terms so that players can understand their responsibilities and the different options based on what they see in front of them without as much verbiage. And it allows them to just be more focused in the moment, react to what they're seeing instead of thinking about it. And I feel like that showed up last night when I talk about the secondary being connected, when I talk about the linebacker drops. It just seemed like there wasn't as much hesitation. And I don't know how one person can be so much better at that than another person, Like if you're a math teacher and you're trying to teach a basic algebraic formula, and one person may just be able to explain it in a way that makes it easier for the student to comprehend it and then be able to act on it and execute it. I think we're seeing that already. A little tip of the iceberg there. McVirus, Byron looked really good from what I saw in the highlights. Let's see. McVirus says PFF hates the Hawks. Cameron Welsh, what struck me after the game is that you would think Coach Mack was the veteran coach and Coach Jim Harbaugh was the rookie coach. Execution was clean, efficient, and organized. Feels good at this stage. Again, even in the post-game press conference, I think one of the most fascinating things to follow this offseason has been watching Mike Macdonald get comfortable in his skin as a head coach and learn how to be a head coach. And there wasn't one moment for me when it clicked, but you could see the progression, and he just seems in complete command now in how he talks about this football team. And he has such a firm grasp on what he wants to see, what he saw, what they're going to do with it next. He isn't as coy or evasive in a vague sense, but he'll tell you, I don't have that answer yet, or that's a long answer. I'm not going to tell that story right now. Things like that. Whereas Pete Carroll sometimes would just kind of hem and haw and just, try to be evasive instead of just telling you, he would be direct at times. Don't get me wrong, but the post-game stuff sometimes. So it was really cool to see how he handles that first experience. And then I can't wait. I hope he does a coach's show tomorrow on 710. I know during the regular season, they're going to do that every Monday after games, but I hope he does tomorrow as well. And we can get more of an extended version after he's watched all the tape. Trevor McGuire says we ran 26 more offensive plays than they did. That's my biggest takeaway. That's huge, right? I mean, fans wanted to heap so much criticism on the offense last year because there would be games when, couldn't get a drive done here or there, or had a key 3 and out. The running game could never get going. And so they wanted to blame us. They wanted to blame the Seahawks not winning more games, not making it to the playoffs on the offense at times when, I just kept saying, or the Geno Smith argument, right? A lot of the Geno Smith detractors would say he didn't get it done in this game. He didn't get it done in that game. He's not consistent enough. And I would just keep pointing back to dead last in the league in number of drives, 30th in the league in number of plays executed because the defense couldn't get off the field. Well, the defense got off the field last night. 5 3-and-outs, only 9 first downs, less than 200 yards given up. That gives the offense more opportunities, more drives, more plays. So that's a great observation, and I think it's huge. I was talking to somebody at work last night because the game was a big topic of conversation because none of us could watch it, and guy said to me, he said, you know what I'm most excited about? I just can't wait to see defense play it again. We just haven't been able to enjoy that for the last couple of years. To which I replied, and the impact of that will also be that I think that home field advantage that has been lost at Lumen over the years comes back because defense is what drives that. If the other team's driving up and down the field, converting third down after third down, keeping your offense off the field, there's just eventually, no matter how intense as a fan you might start the game, screaming when the other team's under center or in shotgun, it's human nature. That's harder to sustain throughout the course of a game when it's not working. And so I think those two things are going to go hand in hand. And then that could be just a snowball effect, right? The louder the crowd is, the harder it is on the opposing offense, the more it gives your team that split second advantage in the pass rush, getting off the ball. It's exciting. And now look, got to say this, right? Disclaimer, it's just one game and it's a preseason game. We'll see what happens in Tennessee this week, but you have to like what you've seen. Let's see. Dune Moose. All the commentary from pundits and 12s don't want to put PC under the bus, and rightfully so. However, the culture appears much improved. Love the early optics. Well said. Chris Neslin said Howell didn't look like a scared college kid. That's an improvement from last season. He was under control and made good decisions. That's a great point. You know, let's talk about last season. At the midway point, he led the league in passing yardage. And then he ends up leading the league in interceptions and sacks. And people wanted to focus on that as some sort of takeaway about his skill level. What I look at is an offensive coordinator in Eric Bieniemy, first time having autonomy, calling plays, who didn't give his quarterback and didn't do his quarterback any favors. Didn't have a great offensive line there, and yet threw the ball 65% of the time. Was near the top of the league in early down pass percentage. Just didn't give any deception to the defense. You know, midway point, teams started to figure out, they're just going to throw the ball. We're going to pin our ears back. And so it's easy to understand that being under duress like that throughout the course of the season, a quarterback's going to develop some bad habits. And maybe that's why it took a few weeks for Howell to get comfortable. He has to relearn some of that stuff, right? I thought he looked nothing yesterday like the player that some had said throughout training camp they saw that just didn't look good. Could not ask for a better first performance from Sam Howell, really. He even had a couple of balls he had one ball to Bobo, seam route, that I thought was absolutely perfectly thrown, split the safeties, and Bobo didn't catch it. He had a couple other throws that weren't caught that I thought could have been. And that was outstanding. McVirus follows that up. If Sam re-signs or gets extended after his contract, which runs through 2025, I'd be pretty happy. But I'm also going to take that with a lot of salt right now. Got to see more from him, of course. Chris Neslin says Brady is a stud. You know, he's going to, he makes his team and actually plays a role. Of course, he's going to be popular because people love long hair. Fans love long hair. Chris, again, this year's cut day is going to be brutal. A lot of teams are going to take our guys. They are, but it goes both ways too. Like, first of all, if other teams take your guys, it means that you have a talented roster. But also, there's going to be 1,000 other players available on that cut down date. And so, right now they're a little thin at nose tackle behind Jonathan Hankins with, Cam Young still not on the field because of injury. If he doesn't get back, And they just had to release Matt Gotel because of an injury settlement. That's unfortunate. I thought he was a guy that would have been a really, really suitable backup for Hankins. They've churned in a bunch of undrafted free agents the last couple of weeks, trying to find someone that might be able to make the roster and give some depth at that interior nose tackle spot. So, they're going to be combing the waiver wire looking for those guys too. So there are always opportunities to give and get, and as well as lose at the cut to 53. Yeah, it's going to be hard to find out who gets cut, and the coaches are going to have a hard time making those decisions. Absolutely. Also, there's so many players available. Teams claim fewer players on waivers now at that big cut than ever before. So there might be a couple of key guys that you're hoping to get through to the practice squad, the team's hoping to get through to the practice squad, that get sniped by other teams that are willing to put them on their 53. That's just part of the business. But I think this roster is so deep that you'll be able to get some quality players in the practice squad. And also, like I said, Raekwon O'Neal, McLennan Curtis, Brady Russell. Those are guys that we took from other teams that cut 53 last year as well. And there's some guys that didn't really play last night that I was looking for. Big Hayden Hatton guy in 10% of the snaps yesterday and get a chance to show what he can do. Some of the offensive linemen, Tawa Lamea, hasn't really gotten a chance to establish himself. Mike Jarrell, the 6th-round draft pick, played in the fourth quarter yesterday. But, some of those guys that were draft picks that you would hate to, let's just address that real quick now. I think those are two good examples. So Tawa Lamea and Mike Jarrell. I love the upside of those guys. I can see them being pieces of this offensive line moving forward, but you might not be able to justify putting them on the 53 this year because you have some other guys that are better that you think are ready to play sooner. So you may have to risk getting those guys through waivers. If you lose them, you lose them. But it means they got beat out by somebody else. 5th and 6th round draft picks are no guarantee. A lot of those guys are going to get cut at the cut to 53. So if neither of those guys establishes himself enough, then it means they got beat out by somebody else. So try to think a little bit less about status at the cut to 53 and more about performance. Let's see. Chris Neslin again says it'll be back to bathroom trips during offensive drives at Lumen. Do you want to miss that though? Maybe it'll just mean less drinking at Lumen. Maybe this is going to cost the stadium and the team a little money because fans are going to want to stay in their seats more. Because what are you going to pick? You're not going to want to miss watching this defense play. But then if you decide to go grab a beer or go to the bathroom when the offense is on the field, you might miss all those guys on offense, and DK and JSN and Lockett, and Bobo, and Ken Walker, and Charbonnet, and Gino going off, and all those guys. It's going to be tough to pick your poison for sure. I want to address this. Adaris Sports says, I think you should add Boyd. Adaris Boyd. I think you should add clips of the game to your show when you're describing to us. Example, like the Anthony Bradford plays you're describing. I can't. It's prohibited. With one exception. I can show all 22 because it's not broadcast version. And I do subscribe to NFL Plus. I will get the all 22. And trust me, as I was watching the replay last night, I was thinking I'm going to have to do a film breakdown this week. I don't know which one it's going to be because there's so many that I could do. I could do Sam Howell, but maybe Anthony Bradford is one. But I have to wait for the all 22, and it takes 2 to 3 days for that to process. I don't usually get that until sometimes 48 hours later. I see other guys that get it in the next day, and they'll put stuff on Twitter. I don't know why they're getting it before me, but until I get the all 22, and then it takes time to screen record that and cut it up. And as long as I do it in an instructional way and it counts as fair use and it's not the broadcast copy, but I couldn't just take highlights of last night's game and show it in the show, or YouTube. I'd get a copyright strike and YouTube would take the video down. Vincente Ochoa says, I didn't hear much about the linebackers last night. I don't know if that's a good thing or if we should be worried with who we have at the moment. I think it's a good thing. They didn't do anything wrong. They weren't out of position. I thought, again, Terrell Dodson had a huge hit in the run game. John Radigan was flying around, coming up and hitting guys in the run game and dropping into coverage. Tyrese Knight seemed to be around the ball. I don't think there's any cause for concern there yet. Other than, we're going to want to see Jerome Baker out there. And now he's dealing with another injury. Need to get him out there. That becomes more of a concern, obviously, the closer we get to the season. And then the final one here, Richard. The Seahawks are going to unleash absolute hell on the Broncos in Lumen. Go Hawks. And then back over through Twitter, I believe. Michael Hendrickson, the red zone offense seemed limited by the unwillingness to open up the playbook. I think that's fair. It was very clear to me after that long drive when they were down inside the 5 that coach staff was like, let's run this in. Let's run it. We have to get better at that part of the game. That was a very conscious effort for sure. If that was a real regular season game and, Ryan Grubb would have come up with something a little more creative there, I think, for sure. And then another question from Michael. D. Eskridge had one good run. Does he still have a chance to make the roster? I don't think he does. He doesn't seem to be the primary choice at kick returner. We heard this week, we heard Corbin tell us about Sam Howell having an outstanding practice on Tuesday, and that even included 2 perfectly thrown passes to D. Eskridge that he dropped. He does nothing to stand out to me. I liked him as a draft pick because I liked his college tape and what he did at the Senior Bowl, but he just looks like another guy. And meanwhile, Derek Young is a guy I could have talked about tonight. He seems to be getting much more run with the 1s and 2s, a much more versatile player, bigger, stronger, faster, catches the ball better, had a 3rd down conversion last night where he had to go down and get a ball that was a little low. We've seen him in the past being used out of the backfield. He's a good blocker. He's on special teams. I don't think D. Eskridge makes his team. No, I do not. I think that's going to wrap this up. Let me just check my notes, see if there's anything I missed. I don't think there is because a lot of your questions addressed some of the stuff I had in my miscellaneous. Coming up later this week, as I said, I will have a new 53-man roster projection at some point this week. I won't promise a film breakdown because those do take a lot of production time, but I would like to back up what I said about Anthony Bradford with some all-22 tape. So I'll try to do that. But you're going to want to tune in tomorrow. Mike Sando of The Athletic and longtime ESPN writer and someone who has a connection here to the Northwest and is very familiar with the Seahawks. And he's one of those guys that he goes to all the training camps and covers the entire league. And so we're going to get a national voice tomorrow on the show and get his thoughts on what he saw in Los Angeles with the Seahawks, and also check in on what some of the other teams in the division did yesterday as well. Follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever. All the different ways to support the show are down in the description. You can check that out at your leisure. But the best way to support the channel is subscribe to the YouTube channel, share it, let other people know about it, retweet when I tweet show announcements, things like that. Hit that thumbs up and the bell button for notification of future episodes. That's my buddy Stephen Douglas in the background. Stephen Douglas and Company, their new EP coming out on Spotify soon. This song's called Dopamine. It'll take us out today. Thanks for tuning in. Really appreciate it. Forever and always, go Hawks.